Welcome, everyone, to the webinar, The Operator's Perspective, Running a Business for an Owner. I'm so excited about this one. I've been telling Chelsea all week. My name is Will Smith. I'm the host of the podcast, Acquiring Minds. And today's session is with Chelsea Wood, co-founder and CEO of Acquisition Lab, and Ted, no?
Nope, I'm Chief Community Officer.
Chief Community Officer. Okay. Great. Well, were you last time the CEO?
Yes, we did the brand relaunch, and so I moved into a Chief Community Officer. I don't want to be CEO, and so Jordan's CEO.
Okay, great. Chief Community Officer, CCO.
So I just stay focused on the community and education and this kind of stuff. I didn't want to do all the ops stuff.
Boy, does that tell us a lot about today's topic. Okay. And then we also have Ted Bronstein, the CEO at We Rent Copiers. We'll make his connection to Acquisition Lab in a few minutes. But as you all probably know, the lab is a cohort-based education community for people serious about buying a business. Many successful grads of the lab have been on Acquiring Minds. I am also realizing, Chelsea, that language is a little dated.
Okay.
Okay, I think it's still true, but
safe space.
The lab's mandate these days is much broader, as we were just discussing. Anyway, Before I hand it over to you, Chelsea, housekeeping for everybody, the usual. We have comments turned off, so if you want to ask a question, use that Q&A button. We are recording. You'll get a link to the recording later today or tomorrow. No slides today. It's just a conversation, so you'll just get a link to the recording, not to the slides. And if you're interested in having a serious conversation about joining the lab, reach out to Julio. That is his email address in the comments. And here is a one-pager as well that is around today's session. And I think with that, Chelsea, I will hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. Yes, lots is changing here at the Acquisition Lab. So hopefully everyone by now has attended at least one of my office hours and will know that I tend to try to be very practical in the topics that we cover. And often it's spurred from something that has happened in the lab in that month, and I try to make it very timely. And so this topic came up because I brought Ted in to talk to our members. We do a bi-weekly call with our members that have acquired. And I wanted Ted to, full disclosure, come in and talk about something else. And ended up, because he was hired as Tim Ericson, our COO, his operator when he acquired We Rent Copiers. He ended up just talking with our members about operating businesses, right? Because that's what they're doing. And it ended up being more like war stories and coaching, which is a whole nother, it was just really cool to watch. And so as I was listening to it, I was thinking, having also been someone that was hired to operate a business, and well, for me, it was build and operate a business for someone. I just realized that this is a common topic that is so often kind of glossed over in the ETA space that it felt like a really fun thing to do. And everyone seems to like when I bring somebody on and we just talk openly versus me talking at you. So I figured what the heck, sorry. And so today we're just going to talk openly about what it has been like operating a company for someone else, and what it takes for that to be successful. And if you're thinking about doing it, what you need to be thinking about to make sure that person feels supported, and how to evaluate. Full disclosure, I really wanted to have a toolkit for you guys because I know that those are really helpful. I didn't get it done. Julio, the saint that is on my team, basically reminded me it doesn't have to be done today. I don't have to stay up all night getting it done, but we will have it done by Friday. And so if you're interested in getting that toolkit, there'll be 4 tools in it that will kind of help you figure out if you are capable of hiring an operator before you own a business, and then if you're owning a business, are you ready to hire an operator? And I think the third tool is if you want to hire an operator, how do you even figure out what skills are required? And then the last one is how do you onboard them properly? So that will be finished by Friday. So if you want it, email Julio and he'll send it to you on Friday, no sooner. But today it's really just me and Ted, and I've got a list of questions that I'm going to go through. And then I want to make sure that we open up enough, or have enough space to open up and let you guys ask us some questions. I'm not going to introduce you, Ted, because we'll kind of get into your background a little bit through the questions. And so feel free to share, whatever you want about your background. But for folks that don't know the backstory, Tim acquired a business before we merged with Tim's fund, he was a lab member. We helped him acquire his first business, We Rent Copiers, and he, after operating, hired you. And so, can you talk to us about the business, what stage it was at, like where was he on his journey? How did he bring you in? Just share kind of backstory, and then we'll dig into the meat of the story.
Absolutely. Thank you. So the business is We Rent Copiers. It's a national short-term copier and printer rental company. Our customers are primarily running conferences or events, or they're law firms, and they have an offsite trial, or as we call it, a war room. And so this is a real operations business. We've got equipment, trucks, technicians doing deliveries in the field. These are 200-pound machines. It's a really niche business. And Tim acquired the business in the summer of 2023. And he operated the business until fall of 2024, which is when I came on. Definitely smart to spend some time after acquiring a business being an operator before you make a decision about what to do next, maybe taking on a new operator. And so in Tim's case, where he was on his journey was he had operated the business for over a year. He was also operating the fund, Shareholder Ventures. This was actually how I got engaged with We Rent Copiers initially. I invested in his acquisition of We Rent Copiers. And so I was engaged, of course, invested in Tim's success. And so he contacted me and said that he was at a bit of a crossroads. He was having success investing in other acquisition entrepreneurs, and that's what he really wanted to do and scale up. But the company itself, We Rent Copiers, still needed stabilization and needed attention. And he had done a lot of really great things. He had hired some really great, really capable back office, finance, and HR folks. He had a pretty solid operations team. He was delivering a high quality customer service. But the financial results were still pretty volatile month to month. Costs weren't really as well aligned to revenue as he wanted, which is in this business pretty relevant in the down periods since there's some seasonality. And so cash flow was still a little bit, hit or miss. And he was making investments in growth and some strategic investments just hadn't really proven themselves out yet. So I think, the business was developing how he envisioned in some respects, but not in others. And he was at the point where it made sense to think about bringing on a new operator with their own vision. And we met in Vermont at a Mexican restaurant, and we had lunch and we talked through where he was at. And the sense that I had leaving that meeting was that the business needed somebody who's fully focused on it and operating it, or else both the company and Tim's bigger vision were at risk of breaking. So it was certainly a clear time for him to bring somebody on, and he brought me on as CEO, gave me responsibility for everything, and a lot of it we figured out as we went.
Oh, there's so much I want to dig into there. I know I sent you a list of questions. I apologize if I completely ignore it entirely, but hopefully you give me grace.
Go for it.
So I think so there's so much there, right? So number one, it sounds like, did you and Tim know each other previously?
We did. So my background previously was in sales leadership and then eventually operations leadership. I had a software sales background. I worked for a company called Bright Cove, which went public around 2010, and was introduced to Tim when he was founding Zagster, a bike sharing company. He was at the seed stage of running that business, and he brought me on to run sales and business development for him. And I actually worked with Tim for about 5 years. As we grew that business to Series C stage, he raised over $40 million and had good success with that business and ultimately sold it. And around 2018, we parted ways, and I stayed in the mobility business. Worked for a company called Spin, which is a scooter sharing company. Became COO of that business, and that's where I got a lot of the operations experience that I have. We were deploying 60,000 scooters every day across 7 countries, and I had a team of 1,000 people who were delivering on that service. So when Tim and I started talking about this role, it was sort of funny because my my identity from Tim's perspective was as a salesperson, but I felt very ready to take on an operations responsibility for a field services business like this.
There's so many parallels between you and my story in the sense of, and so I'm going to try to organize my thoughts here because I think there's a lot of things. So Walker is somebody that buys companies typically with operators. Historically, that's how he's always functioned. And we have lab members who also do the same thing. And a lot of times we'll have people come and try to join the lab, and they want to buy a company and hire an operator right away. They want to maintain their W-2 and hire an operator. And I think the reason why I thought this conversation would be so helpful is because everyone I know that does this well approaches it the same way. It's how Tim's approached it. It's how Walker approached it. And then it's how lab members who have succeeded approached it too. And so I'm just going to double click a little bit on this part, and then we'll come back to some of the other stuff. Historically, it feels like in order to do this well, you have to have an operator in mind. So like, I have one success story where somebody hired out of like a Facebook group, cold, or like maybe Indeed or something like that. But historically, in order for this to work really well, it's because they reached out to someone they knew, right? That they trusted, that they'd worked with before, that they knew could execute on this vision that they have. If you also have done stuff with recruiting and things in your past life, and so as you think about doing this, can you see how it would be possible? Because this is where my brain gets tripped up every time I talk to anybody wanting to do this. How would you go about filling a position that you know nothing about for a company you know nothing about? How do you hire somebody like that? Like, am I crazy for thinking that that's just not something that is I mean, I guess it can be done, but like, anyway, what do you think about that?
Well, I mean, trust was absolutely beneficial to us. Tim and I had a lot of trust from our previous time working together. But if I was in his shoes and I was looking for somebody and I didn't know somebody already who I could trust, I would hire for somebody who I felt had great aptitude to deliver, great attitude, because running a small business is really not a walk in the park, and then great alignment with them, both in terms of where they're at in their career and this being the right fit for them, and then also with regards to compensation and what you can give them. You know, running a business as an owner, a small business within the range that we're talking about, can be really, fruitful financially. And you're the equity owner, and that equity is where you're going to get the most payoff. But in terms of, financial alignment, if you bring on an operator and they don't have that equity component to motivate them, then they need to be in the right place and the opportunity needs to be right for them to get something that's fulfilling to them. And for me, compensation was one piece, but also I really just wanted to run a business. This was my first opportunity to run a business, and that really motivated me.
So I think that there's so many things that you said there. I will nerd out on this kind of stuff all day long, so I'm trying to stay focused. Okay, so compensation is a big component, and we hear this all the time, like for key employees or operators. And so what was that conversation like when it comes to equity, right? So like lab members will say, should I offer equity? Should I do phantom equity? Should I do some kind of bonus structure? And so what do you think is the compensation structure that leads to natural alignment and clear delineation of responsibilities?
Sure. So I think it in some ways depends on the business and on what people want, what their risk appetite is, of course. For me, I was already an equity stakeholder because I had invested in Tim's acquisition. So I had some equity exposure there to motivate me. Um, the best, I think that, so we had a base structure and then also bonus plan. And we structured the bonus plan based on EBITDA. And I think, after having that experience, I would more recommend typically to base it off of cash flow or, SDE or sort of cash available to distribute. And this is just for our business and where we were at together. But it works better for us because of the sort of broader ambitions that that we had, right? I mean, Tim was also building the fund, and for him, having comfort that we would be generating cash on a consistent basis was the most important thing, because he had his personal guarantee, still at risk in this business. Um, and of course, when you're an operator, it's very easy to justify pulling cash from the business when you're cash flow positive. Whereas if you're generating EBITDA, that can really accrue the benefit to the owner, but not create cash that you can distribute to yourself. And as an operator of a small business, you're probably not taking a huge base, and so cash can be cash bonus can be a big driver for you.
I think so. For me, we have a lot of equity discussions in the lab, right? As far as how do I incentivize my, key employees or my partners or, whatever it is, operators. One caveat that I will give everyone, when I built the lab, it was very similar, right? I had a conversation with Walker. What he was asking me for was much different from where I was in my career. He just had an outdated kind of mindset of where I was. And then suddenly it turned into a much bigger conversation, right, to go and build the lab. And so initially I didn't have equity in mind at all, right? I wasn't in that world. I was never thinking about it from that perspective. And probably about 2 years into having the lab members were like, this is yours too, right? And I was like, what do you mean? Lab members are amazing. I love them all, which I tell them often. It's probably unhealthy. But at the end of the day, like, once I asked Walker, like, hey, like, lab members are saying I should have equity. He's like, you should have equity. That's absolutely correct. And it was easy, right? But like, it was something that I never was exposed to. And so, but I do think that early days of operating to me becoming an owner of the company I was operating was a very different mindset for me coming out of corporate America. And so something I struggled with originally, and we'll get to this question, hell, I guess right now, is like, I know that created some friction with Walker and I, because as the operator, I still had the employee mindset, right? Like, he brought me on to build a company for him, and he wanted me to have all this control, but I still felt like an employee. And so I wouldn't own things. I would go to him and say, like, well, what do you want to do? And he's like, I don't give a shit. Just go do what you want. Like, I trust you inherently to go do whatever you have in your mind. But without that ownership component, I didn't feel like I had the ownership, right, to go and to do these things. Because at the end of the day, I'm a technical thinker, I've come to realize. Like, literally, it was his company. And so I do think that if people have the kind of brains that some people have, having that connection to equity and actually being able to identify it as an owner helps with that mindset shift. Because at the end of the day, you want employees to think like owners, right? But it's hard if you're coming out of a world where you have always been an employee to take on that true mindset. The other thing that I want to double click on a little bit, because you mentioned that Tim had done strategic investments in talent. And that is one thing I think Walker did that I'm very grateful for, because I was the investment. But like, everyone around him was telling him to not hire me. I was expensive, right? But what they didn't realize is, like, the lab would never be what it is today had he not hired me, right? Because they were telling him to hire kind of like, I don't know how to say it in a PC way, so I'm sorry if it sounds offensive. I don't mean it to. Like, low level talent, right? Like, he just needed this technical skill and he just needed this technical skill. But what he knew was, if he made a good, strong investment in strategic investment, right, and pay somebody a higher value, they can function at a higher level, right? And I do think that that's what we did really well that helped the lab be as successful as it is, because I could take it and run with it and make it my own, because that's what I did, right? And that's what he wanted me to do. And so it feels like that's also what Tim did with you, and with other people that he hired before he brought on an operator. And so can you just talk a little bit about how you see how the business has benefited from kind of that strategic investment up front in talent?
Sure. Yeah. And I would say that both Tim and I have come from venture capital backed businesses. So equity compensation is a sort of a part of your DNA, if you're in those businesses. And it can be a really great alignment creator between the owner and the operator. or any employee, if you have it, because things change. I mean, it's a constant pivot running a small business, and I'm experiencing that with We Rent Copiers, and then also with the lab and the work that I do for the lab. You can set a goal, and it can be a year-long goal, and things can completely change throughout the course of that year. And so, 3 months in, you're either way behind the eight ball on your goal, but you think that you have done a great job, and you might have done a great job, but the goals have changed for the business, or you could be way ahead of the goal, but potentially not contributing just because of other circumstances. Yeah, Tim really set me up for success, having brought on a strong finance and HR back office that supported me. It was critical for me because I did not come from a background where finance and HR reported through me in the past. And so this was one of the areas where I was most looking forward to actually getting experience as a CEO. It was what I felt was a gap in my background. When I stepped in, everything was just running for me. So this was both huge for Tim and huge for me, right? For Tim knew that he could depend on accurate financials, right? And a team that could make strategic financial decisions, and then also a team that could grow or rebuild itself if we needed to change, team members. So having that as I stepped in was, I think, a really big benefit to Tim. Tim and I would just spend time going through the P&L, knowing that we could trust the numbers, and that would be how he would sort of inspect how I was doing at first. And then, yeah, for me, I had a team that was just humming as I stepped in.
I think that I should have had Tim join us because he's got stories, and I know the stories from being the advisor. I don't think he would care me sharing, but it's like when he first acquired, right, there were some challenges with the financials and he made the choice to have that strategic investment in bringing somebody in to help clean up the financials, right? And it's like, same thing with the hiring stuff. And so I think that if I could make any takeaway to any of the searchers that are on this call, I know that it feels counterintuitive to invest in talent because it typically takes money away from you. And this is the same thing. Everybody waits way too long. I waited too long to hire an assistant. Everyone waits too long to hire an assistant and it's the same thing, right? If you invest in strong talent, it will have such high ROI because they're capable of doing so much and really allowing you to go do other things. And they take the business into directions that you never anticipated. And I have to, I don't mean to, it sounds bad when I say I didn't have equity initially with Walker, but this was never meant to be like a $10 million company. It was a passion project for Walker. So him and I kind of just started this thing, and then it became something, and everybody's like, shit, this is something you should have ownership in this thing, right? And so I think that and I tell lab members this all the time when it comes to the earnings, you have to make sure that you are setting money aside for investing in growth. Sometimes investing in growth means hiring somebody that's a little bit more expensive than somebody that you could pay for a more entry-level technical position, right? Because that person can move the company to here, and then they can fill that position later. And I do think that that's one thing that Tim, and he's done it here in the lab as well. We have so many people now. It's the only reason the lab is on this huge increases because they come from this VC mindset of investing in talent first and foremost, right? And labs was grassroots, right? So any way we grew was because of the revenue that we would bring in. And by we, I mean me and the few people that we had helping. And so I think that you were not the first person that he brought in, right? He brought somebody in first thinking that the role needed to be something different, right?
So when he acquired the business, he brought on a GM who was more of an operations manager, like a day-to-day operations manager. He wasn't running the entire business, but he was running our field services day-to-day, basically. So our dispatching and our our drivers and technicians and so forth. He was running that side of things.
So I just got off of a call with a lab member who's under LOI right before this, and there's a gap. There's two owners, and the second owner is more of a technical, he is literally a professional engineer, and our member isn't. And we were having this conversation because it's like, I think I need to hire somebody like right now that can dive into the diligence for me and start on day one. And I get it, 100%, like the drive to do that. And my advice to him, good or bad, was like, but you don't actually know what the business needs. You just know what's always been there. Right. And like, I think sometimes as a way to, oh God, this is going to sound bad, but like as a way to compensate for our own insecurities, people feel the need to like hire an operator, right? And often they fill a position that was already in existence without realizing that that position isn't what the position that was needed. And I think that's what Tim learned, right? Was like the position he thought he needed was an ops manager type of a role, but what he really needed was right? More of a CEO role. And so that was the conversation that I had with this member is like, you don't actually know if you need, I can't think of what this person's title is, but like that level of a person, right? And you won't know until you get in there. And so hiring somebody right now could actually set you back, right? Because then you have that person and now you have to unravel that person when you realize that you don't actually need that level of skill. And I think that is universal, happens a lot. And it's hard to know, like, do I need a GM? Do I need a CEO? Do I need an admin assistant, an executive assistant, a project manager? Like and I've had this conversation on other office hours in the past. There's a lot of like structure that goes into figuring out the right role. And you have to spend time understanding what the role is to make sure you're hiring the person with the right skill set. And so I just appreciate that journey that he was on. And I love that he ended up with you. Can you talk a little bit about how you guys stayed aligned? Like, I know I got pushed back early in the first couple of years from Walker, not owning things enough, not feeling comfortable. And so how did you guys keep that where you felt empowered and, to go and make all the decisions yourself? Did you guys have regular meetings? Like, what did that look like?
We did. We had regular meetings. We would, like I said, go over the P&L and at first that was a really tactical conversation. And I think you as an owner want to make sure that your operator is on top of things and understands everything that's going on in the business. Over time, it became much more strategic, and I was really driving the conversation. I think, in our case, you have to know who you are as an owner. And to touch back on what you were just saying, as an owner, you might buy a business with a vision of someday, being an absentee owner or, bringing on an operator and then broadening your horizons, doing something else. But it's really hard to do that from day one. I think most often you end up buying a business that's a little bit different than what you thought it was, or your growth plans or your vision just doesn't end up coming to fruition. And that was sort of the case with We Rent Copiers, I think, for Tim. And so, this is where being aligned strategically was really important for us. Tim bought the business. Tim has a growth mindset. He's a risk taker, and he's like to the max. And I think he was always pushing on growth. He saw me as a sales leader who's going to come in and everything was going to work well operationally, and I could focus on selling to more customers that looked like the best customers that we already had. And so I had a goal to double EBITDA in 2 years, and that was really the direction that we aligned on from the beginning. How am I going to sell in order to accomplish that goal? What I saw as I entered the company was that some of the sort of strategic growth investments that we had ongoing weren't necessarily proving that they were succeeding or failing, or that we should be doing them. And so one of the early tests that we had to align around was our ad strategy. We were doing paid search ads in order to try to drive revenue growth. And suspected that it was working well, but my theory was that we were actually just paying for customers we would have generated anyway without that strategy. So within the first 90 days, I decided to run a test where we cut ad spend significantly. We cut it by around 2/3 in the third month that I was at the company. That was a really big, sort of challenge for us, I think, relationally, because Tim brought me on with the thought that I'm just going to be driving revenue growth, pushing as hard as I could on revenue growth, and it ended up being correct that we were spending on ads where we shouldn't have been spending on ads. And so we ended up cutting our ad strategy entirely, and that really drove profitability and is one of the big reasons why we will achieve our goal to double EBITDA. But we're going to double EBITDA in a completely different way than we thought. And it'll be more operationally by being efficient, streamlining things, which is also a great way to do it. So you don't know how you're going to be able to develop the end result that you want, but working closely together, making sure that you are having the uncomfortable conversations, and when you're going to make a strategic decision to pivot, just making sure that you're communicating, proactively and pivoting again when you see the results.
Well, I think and this is the last thing I'll touch on it, Will, if you want, and then I can pivot to questions because I know we're getting late. But I think that's an interesting point that no one talks about is the rub between how do you function as the operator when you are the one that lives and breathes the business, you understand the market, you understand the business. The owner, who's very hands off and off doing other things, doesn't have the same insight you have, but they still have ideas. And like, how do you manage that back and forth, especially if the person has a personal guarantee for the business, right? And so can you talk a little bit about what that looked like, right? That's a perfect example. I've had a similar one, and it's like, how does that work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's hard. First, I think as an owner, you need to sort of know yourself and why you're doing it and be really comfortable trusting somebody, right? To take on your baby here. It's like, very difficult. I have not done this myself, but I can, I'm not somebody who can like bet on a football game and then not watch the game, right? Like I need to, if I'm gonna put something at stake, I want to be engaged in it, right? It's really hard, I think, to step away and put trust in somebody else, especially if the strategy is going to change or it's going to develop in a way that you didn't imagine it to develop. I think, you can tell in the relationship whether you really trust each other and whether the operator cares as much as the owner needs the operator to care. I really didn't want Tim's acquisition to fail. We have a history of working together. I consider him a friend. I know how painful a failed acquisition can be. I don't need to have gone through it to know. But the reality is that preventing somebody else from that pain is not the same as preventing yourself from that pain. And you could have an operator who is doing a great job, but they decide to leave the business for whatever reason. And you always have that risk as an owner. So I think, an owner has to stay engaged to some degree, has to have a pulse on the financial results, a pulse on the strategy. But what worked really well in our case was that Tim gave me autonomy from day one. He was there for support if I asked, but there were no training wheels. And if I had an issue, I was going to bring it to him, and if I was going to make a bet, I was going to tell him, and we were going to review the results, and I would be accountable if right or wrong.
Well, I think it's important, and we talk about this in the lab all the time about buying businesses, but it's even more important as a manager or now as hiring an operator. You have to know yourself, right? If you are someone that struggles with control or struggles with like knowing just have you had bad hires historically? Like, you need to be honest with yourself, right? Because there's a tremendous amount of risk in handing your business over to someone else when you have a personal guarantee on the line. And I think that I think everything that you've shared in my own experience, and again, what's happened with lab members that has succeeded, and we have a lot of lab members that came on with operators or partners. They're all people that have long-standing relationships, right? And in order to do this well, it is in businesses in general in this space, it's all relationship based. But you have to have a deep like respect for one another and an ability to have open and honest conversations. Because if not, I just don't know how it works otherwise. Because again, this operator is the one that is the keeper of the keys, right? Like they know everything, and you're going to know very little if you're not touching the day to day. And that is a tremendous kind of power imbalance when you're the one on the line with the guarantee. And so I think that relying on relationships is really important, and that's why it's so important to rely on people that have done well for you in the past. If you don't want to operate the way that it's worked really well for lab members, and this is the advice I'll give anyone that wants to maintain their W-2, go find somebody that does want to operate and go buy a business that's right for them, right? Don't worry about buying a business that's right for you because you have nothing to do with this at this point other than signing the guarantee. You want to make sure that you're buying a business that's good for the strong operators that you know in your life. And then having them align on ownership of the results. Because what you just shared, like for me, because of who I am as a human, I'm a values-based human. Like I don't want to do harm to the world. It's just not who I am. And that is who Walker is. And so like he didn't have a personal guarantee with the lab, but it was his personal brand. Like I didn't want to hurt his brand and then eventually my brand that I developed. And so you want somebody that has deep ownership of the outcomes, whether that's that they don't want you to go bankrupt or they don't want to hurt your reputation as a human. And I just feel like that's not so easy to find when it's just an employee that you hire off of Indeed, right? And not to say that it can't be done with the right compensation structure, but I think if it's your first acquisition and you're doing this with a guarantee, relying on your network is really the critical success factor in my opinion. I want to respect time. Will, do you want to open up to questions or do you want us to keep going?
Yeah, let's do some questions. I think that'd be great. We're getting some come in. So I'll ask one of my own. So I think maybe it would be worth teasing out a little bit the spectrum of operator roles, because we've heard you guys talk about ownership and Chelsea, your early tension with Walker, where he actually wanted you to almost be like his partner I mean, arguably, if you both are on the cap table, you are partners formally, but even more in a more emotional way, really your partner in building the business, his co-founder.
Yeah.
And then that's one end of the spectrum, and it was a 0 to 1 case. I mean, you guys were building this from scratch, so that's an extreme case. At the other end of the spectrum would be the non-strategic kind of GM person who keeps the trains running, keeps the business going, but that person is unlikely to grow your business for you unless you're fortunate enough to have a business that sort of self-grows because there's enough demand in your market. And then Ted, you'd be closer to the Chelsea end, but not all the way there. But you're certainly strategic, as you said. I think you said Tim started with somebody who was more like the dispatcher GM type, and he needed more than that. So I don't know. Sorry, what the exact question is, but I think dialing this in is there. It's very case by case, and we're talking about different things in some of these things.
No, and I love it because, and this is Chelsea's perspective, guys, it's not fact. I think there's a misconception in business that it's either or. And in Chelsea's opinion, every business needs both. Like you need somebody to be leading from a strategy perspective and driving the vision forward. Because if you're not growing your business is dying. Like that's how business life cycle works, right? So somebody involved in that business, if it's not you, someone needs to be driving that business forward and growing it. Otherwise, what are you really doing, right? And so I think there's a little bit of and at the same time, often it's a different skill set. So often your strategic person isn't your train conductor, right? Of keeping everything, or I guess it would be more air traffic controller, right? And so I do think you need both. I think someone, and I think that that's what is bothers me a little bit in this market is like, and I'm coming at it just from years and years of being an IO psychologist working with businesses, is like this idea that if I just put somebody in there that keeps the trains on the tracks, it's fine. You're missing a huge component. That CEO role was always aimed for growth, right? And so if you're not willing to be that, then who the hell is doing it?
Yeah, and I would say that's maybe also the continuum of the owner, that you might want to start after acquiring a business being very hands-on, or not depending on bringing on a GM or somebody else to be the air traffic controller, but be as hands-on as you can. Make sure that you understand the business deeply and that you're able to move the needle to drive performance yourself. Then bring on an operator who can be more of the air traffic controller, which then elevates your role naturally to being more of the strategist and visionary and outward facing growth leader. And then at that point, when you've proven that you can do that, I think bringing on a more senior leader who can take on that responsibility and grow could give you the opportunity to step away completely. But I do think
I think that's it.
I think, Ted, that helped me just crystallize something I've never really. We talk about in versus on the business, but I think there's the third, which is passive. So you work in the business as the operator, then you work on the business as you're still 50 hours a week in your business, but you at this point are not keeping the trains running. You're the one making strategic decisions, outward facing, et cetera. So you're still very much in the business, but on it, not in it. This is the classic dichotomy, but then kind of the next rung on the ladder, if you will, if you wanted, could be a more true or more passive role altogether. And we should also be clear that I think most people want to go from in to on, but not everybody will want to go from on to passive. They may want to just be the CEO of a growing business. Sounds pretty awesome to me. So anyway, yeah.
I think that's, Ted, you said it perfectly, and Will, you kind of summarized it perfectly. But I do think most lab members do want to be in that passive role. And so when I hear on social media, everybody wants to be passive, that's the path to passive. And we always say passive, you can't just start at passive typically, unless you're willing to invest a ton of money, right? It's either time or money investment to become passive. And so I think that's it's the elevation, right? You guys said it perfectly.
Great. Well, guys, back to you as operators. So here's the good, if a little awkward question, but elephant in the room or obvious one. So, do you feel resentment that you're the ones doing all the work, and your overall comp, including equity, is going to be less, probably significantly less than the owner? That's just the nature of this relationship. But does it create tension?
I mean, I'll answer it from my perspective and then I'll hand it over to Ted. I think that, yes, it absolutely creates resentment. Not like deep resentment, but it's just psychological, right? Like it's just how we're wired. And I think that's why that relationship is so important for me as a human. Like if I didn't love Walker deeply as a human because he's just such a phenomenal human, there would be resentment there. At the same time, I'm really grateful because I couldn't do this without him. And it's afforded me so much opportunity and I think that's most people, but to act like there's never going to be the mindset in an operator of what the hell, I'm doing all of this to make you richer. That's just ignorant. Everyone's going to have that thought at some point, especially, and this is why I raised that point, if there's friction when you know the business and they have a different idea, not knowing the business. To me, that's the only time I ever saw kind of that tension rise in myself where I was like, what the hell? I know what I'm doing, which very rarely happened. I'm very blessed. And Walker he did see me as a partner initially, and I just didn't recognize that because I came from the employee mindset. And so again, the relationship is just so critical to me. If you don't have that underlying you're going to lose your operator because nobody wants to make somebody else richer. That's why everyone's out buying businesses for themselves, right? And so, anyway, go ahead, Ted.
I love the question. I love your answer. I mean, sure, I think a little bit, but the reality is that if we fail, if I fail, I'm not going to go bankrupt, right? I mean, you take on the an inordinate amount of risk and an inordinate level of reward. And if I, as an operator, and if I'm unhappy with that, then I can go buy my own business, right? Um, or do something else that gives me that level of risk. So I think as an owner, you just have to keep hammering home that reality. Please don't fail, or I stand to lose much, much more.
I think that's a perfect kind of it's risk. Like because with me, I wasn't willing to build the startup without a paycheck. Like that was my hard stop. And Walker's like, okay, like if I have to pay you every month a set thing, whereas his risk profile is different.
Yeah.
And so it's just recognizing, to your point, where the actual risk lies.
Well, that and you've touched on something there, Ted, that is the uh why people like you guys are can be unicorns, because it's like you as the owner want somebody entrepreneurial. You want them to be strategic and think about growing the business and so on. But if they're so entrepreneurial, they would probably be buying a business themselves. And so it's kind of like finding the person, and maybe it comes down to risk profile and what the needs are, and somebody needs a steady check, and so they can't just go off and get a personal guarantee and buy a business, or their own balance sheet doesn't yet permit it, whatever. But it's like you want somebody who's entrepreneurial, but not so entrepreneurial, because otherwise they would have bought a business themselves.
I think the balance sheet thing is the point. There's so many people that I talk to that, in my opinion, don't have the skills yet to truly buy a company and succeed, but they would be amazing operators for somebody, right? And they can go and learn and build the skills, specifically people that haven't like managed teams or had P&L responsibility. Like to me, those are the people that should go be operators for someone else for 5 years, learn what it means on their risk, their personal guarantee.
Yeah.
And then you go do it for yourself once you have developed those skills. And so to me, pardon me for saying, but there is a great privilege in being able to buy a company. Not everybody has the money to go buy a company that's stable and has infrastructure and all that stuff, right? And so some people, just to your point, aren't to a place to be able to do it for themselves yet. I wasn't when I first met Walker, right? My husband had just graduated college. Like I couldn't have done this on my own without him. And so when I say that there was tension, there's always going to be tension because we're human, right? But like it doesn't, as if you're a logical human, you come back to reality about how much you benefit, right? And there are people out there that aren't ready to buy companies yet that would kill to be operators in a small business to kind of earn those chops.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, it's great. Great answer. Hi, Jackie. Jackie asks if so. You guys have both said relying on existing relationships instead of trying to go recruit a rando. But a lot of people actually, I think somebody else asked the same question as Jacqueline. What if you just don't have such a person in your network? Then what? What do you advise? Where do you go build relationships?
Well, then you hire, right? But you hire after you understand the business and can manage the relationship. And so when obviously relying on your own network is key, but to me, that's just key for doing it ahead of time, right? Like having somebody and bringing them into a company, you need to know who they are and have a good fit for them. And this goes back to the conversation I was having with our member earlier, is like, it's very hard to fill a position that you don't understand. We've all hired people before, right? But like to Ted's point, Tim knew this business, right? And same thing with Walker before he hired an operator, like he worked in the printing company or whatever for like years and years and years. And so I would tell Jackie is like, you just need to know the business I would say if you don't have somebody to rely on, then you need to plan to buy a company that you're going to be operating for a while so that you can evaluate talent appropriately and make sure you get somebody that's a fit for the role.
Yeah. And while you're operating the business that you bought for year 1, 2, 3, you can be out there networking your way into the industry that you are now a participant in, and be always keeping your eyes open for who would be a good candidate down the road. Yeah.
And ideally promoting, right? So like
Yeah.
hopefully there's somebody there in the company
Exactly.
that might be able to be coached into the position for you over time. And so I just think there's so much, it's so interesting to me to approach this before you know the company. And
Yeah.
that conversation I had with this member is like, how do you know that you don't have the talent already on the team if this person was a micromanager for decades? Like you may not need to replace them. You may just be able to have the team that exists actually exist for once. So anyway.
We're at 5 minutes until the hour, guys. So this will be, unless somebody's got a burning other question, this will probably be our last one. What is you've both talked about some of the appeal of doing this and why it's been valuable, but let's dial in on that specifically. What is the pitch to an operator? What resonated with you to say yes to Walker, in your case, Chelsea, Tim, and yours, Ted?
For me, it was very similar to kind of the story Ted shared. It was this opportunity to do something I felt like I was ready for, but I hadn't had the opportunity yet. And when Walker pitched this, it was everything I've ever done. Like, and this actually goes to buying companies. It's everything I've ever done and excelled at in one role, right? So like everything I've ever done in my past, the things I was great at, that's what he was describing to me. And so it just made sense. It was like, hell yeah, like, sure, let's try it. And so I think that to me was like the opportunity to do something I hadn't been given the opportunity to do yet was incentivizing for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. There were areas of my career where I felt like I had some gaps that I wanted um, to close. And now having had the experience of being an operator, I would feel so much more prepared to buy a business if I choose to do that. And yeah, I mean, I think that knowing Tim gave me a big benefit because I believed that his next steps, what he was going to do as I became the operator, would ultimately lead to something great, which it has. And so I think as an owner, as an operator, you have to evaluate, the ambitions of one another, and if there's a chance that you can both grow together and take on more in the future, then that's I think a winning combination.
But Ted, to be clear, part of this was um, a potential stepping stone for you to eventually buy your own business?
Potentially, or just running a business, running additional businesses, which I'm doing now actually. So as part of the acquisition lab, I run a services business, which helps all the entrepreneurs who acquire companies with their back office finance and recruiting support. So effectively, at this point, I'm running a couple businesses at the same time, and yeah, who knows what the future holds.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I ask one last question, Will?
Of course, Chelsea.
Because I have something I want to throw in. What's one thing that you, Ted, that you wish you would have done differently or that you would share with anyone thinking about hiring an operator?
One thing that I would do differently as an operator, um, I think getting the incentives correct from the beginning. I think we touched on that a little bit, just whether it should be EBITDA or whether it should be cash, and how long it should be of a plan. Given that when you're an operator coming on, if you're not heavily incentivized by equity and can see that through, there's going to be a lot of twists and turns along the way, and you don't want to feel misaligned from the start. I think we could have done a little bit better on that, but we were able to work it out. And then the second question, Chelsea, I'm sorry.
No, that was it. I just wanted to, and I feel very similar. So the thing I wanted to share that's kind of a takeaway for me that I try to tell lab members about. So a lot of people use Phantom Equity, and I think it's a great resource. But if you're going to use Phantom Equity, I do wish I would have understood Phantom Equity as somebody that had Phantom Equity. I wish I would have done it differently. Like, I wish I would have understood what that meant for me as the operator. And for anyone that doesn't know, phantom equity means that if the person has equity upon transfer of ownership, that person is paid out their share of the equity, but it's taxed at an income level versus capital gains if it's actually equity on paper. And so I wish I would have known that. And I try to make sure, and I think there's no right or wrong, right? This is just something that now, having operated a company for somebody, I wish I would have known. And I try to make lab members aware. So you can make the decision if you are a phantom equity person or if you want to just give them equity in the entity. Walker and I chose because, again, this was a passion project. It wasn't like he didn't start an LLC called Acquisition Lab. It was just like hey, let me try this thing. So I had phantom equity. And him and I both regret doing it that way. We should have just started an LLC and taken it that way. And I will do that forever moving forward. When I have partners, is I will make sure that it is a legal entity and they have equity, not phantom equity.
Because of the way you were ultimately taxed.
Correct.
And what is the supposed benefit of phantom equity to the owner? It's usually considered a good thing for the owner.
Yeah, and a lot of people use it, and I don't think it's a bad idea. I just want people to be aware of what it means, right? Like it's Walker's biggest regret. He feels awful about it, and him and I have had lots of conversations about it. And it's a common approach that's used because if the person leaves, they no longer have equity. And so it's a way to recognize your operator in a way that's pretty socially acceptable. And not every operator wants to be like, initially, I probably wouldn't have wanted paper equity because it ties you to someone. And my risk profile when I first started the lab, I just didn't want that. I didn't want to be legally bound to anyone. I protect my own kind of a thing with my family. Now I have a very different perspective. And so it's not to say that your people wouldn't prefer phantom equity, because it's basically saying, I really value you. And if I ever sell this company, you'll get your part of it upon exit. It's just that's treated as income if they do. And that's kind of painful.
But the reason owners like it is because it doesn't have a lot of the other properties that true equity does.
Correct.
So there's no voting, there's no claim on EBITDA or cash flow that is kind of the default state for real equity.
Yes.
And it's also very exit oriented. You could say the same about all equity.
Entirely.
But the phantom equity is just like, if there's never a liquidity event, it is just, there's no benefit to it at all.
No, and it's one of those things where it's phantom equity. It's all about the exit. And how do I say this nicely? Like, it's a way, I mean, you can fire your operator and then they have nothing, even if you wanted to exit. So it's like a little non-committal. We did it because the lab was like a project within another entity that owned another business. And so like it just made sense. And so it's kind of a way to, it's kind of a little lip servicey, which is why Walker regretted doing it that way. Because technically speaking, you could fire your operator tomorrow and not give them anything, even if you were selling. You hopefully do that. And so anyway,
right. Real equity is forever. Phantom equity can be yanked back.
Correct. Which is why I probably wouldn't have agreed to it early on. And so I'm glad where we landed, but like it's a knowledge thing that I like to share with lab members, because it wasn't something we never thought about exiting, and so it didn't really ever matter. It was just ownership, so I could say like, yes, the lab's my baby, but then it bit us both in the ass, and we regretted that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions about this that are going on right now. Can't you structure phantom equity to extend beyond termination, et cetera, et cetera? And this is one of the issues with phantom equity. If you as an owner are working with an operator who has experience with this or does the research, the operator ends up negotiating the phantom equity agreement to become as close to actual equity as possible. And this is really not the best foot to start the relationship on. I think you want to have an operator, if you're hiring a senior person and equity is on the table in one form or another, you want to have a person who is going to ask for true equity in the business. It'll be the best for you in the long run, because this is most likely going to be a higher performer and truly will be aligned with you in the exact same way you are.
Exactly.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yep. Anything else?
Well, I think we should wrap it, guys. We could keep going. This is a fascinating topic. Great discussion between the two of you. We never hear from the operators. We talk about you constantly. It's like sellers. We talk about sellers constantly, but we never actually meet these curious creatures. And so here you are in front of us. It was a lot of fun. Audience, check that link out in the chat. That is just a one-pager on what the Acquisition Lab is today, Acquisition Lab 2.0, since the merger with Shareholder Ventures. Tim Ericson, whose name you keep hearing, that's Ted's boss at We Rent Copiers, or Ted's owner. Maybe you don't like the language of boss. Is now part of the lab and merged with the lab, and just you guys have all kinds of stuff going on now. It's really exciting to watch. So there's a one-pager there. And if you want to talk about joining the lab, get in touch with Julio. There's his email address, julio@acquisitionlab.com. Guys, any last thoughts before I say goodbye?
Nope. If you want the toolkit, ask Julio. I'll have it ready on Friday.
Super. Ted, thanks for doing this. A lot of fun. Really great perspective. Chelsea, what a great idea. Thank you, as always, for a great webinar. Don't know if we have next month's topic yet, but everybody keep your eyes peeled for that. Chelsea will be back next month. And audience, thank you for coming. Thank you for your attention, and watch your inboxes this afternoon, tomorrow morning for a link to the session.
All right,
This
perfect.
ends the webinar. Thank you, everyone.